and welcome to another episode of Denzalist Gaming Podcast. I do apologise, it's been a while since I've done an episode. I've had a lot on at the moment, and my mental health's been a bit up and down, but we're getting there now. So this episode is done by chance because I'm just gutting my flat at the moment, and I come across some sketchbook of like notes and little images and stuff like that I've jotted down and stuff like that, and I come across a podcast idea I was going to do, put in a lot of detail but never got around to doing it. So I think now is the perfect time to do a random off-cuff episode. So this one's about art in video games, and there's still some people who don't class video games as art. Well, I go by the thing, if you class things like movies as art, basically somebody's interpretation of a director, choreographer, cinematographer. Video games have all of those, and I think video games have more less limitations now, especially when it comes to graphical fidelity, that now anybody's idea or creation you can sort of make real. I mean, you look at the game / video tools Dreams. There's so many people who made absolutely beautiful things just using that program, and like I said, with things like the new Unreal Engine, more realistic and easier to attain, visuals, and like I said, there's more tools to create whatever is in your mind basically. So when you've got like artistic directors like Guillermo del Toro working with video game makers and directors, that is a great thing. And also, how can you not say that's art, where you're getting people from what's called the classic sort of traditional art forms, like musicals, movies and things like that, and now you are getting them into the video game industry. Few examples there's lots we can do, but if we're talking about sort of really interesting stories, or things which stand out from others, there's games like Metal Gear Solid, which is basically Hideo Kojima's idea to make an interactive video game, interactive movie basically through video games. And like I says, and yeah, they're not perfect. There's a lot of really convoluted storylines, there's some silliness, but do I not love them, and am I compelled every time I play the original Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3? All the characters, yes, some are absolutely ludicrous, but they still are able to ground them in this world. And like I said, the characters are just brilliant. If you're looking more sort of games which conjure a feeling or a sort of sense of dread or things like that, with the aesthetics and things like that, look at Bioshock. Bioshock had that sort of 30s to 40s sort of art deco sort of grand sort of style, but put into an underwater supposed utopia, which is decayed basically. And and honestly, even if you're not a big fan of like, you know, thriller slash, I wouldn't say horror, but you know, a thriller action game, the aesthetics and what they went for, and also the musical score, it just, yeah, it works. It adds that tension, and when there's really yeah, scary or important bits happening and stuff like that, and it's just, yeah, the score just works so well with the aesthetics, and you know, and with the graphics they were able to use at that time. And even though there's been many other Bioshocks and also even a new one supposedly in the pipeline, but we'll see if that's going to be any good, because there's no Ken Levine, but that's a long story. But with like Bioshock, you know, I think that's one of the ones I would use as basically, you know, his games are, because it's got twists, it's got, you know, building of narrative characters. You've also got like audio logs where it builds the world up and why this world was made, and also why has it like fallen into, you know, a destructive area, with basically everyone virtually being like drug addicts to these you know, these injections to get your powers basically. And yeah, and it's just every single bit is so you can tell it took so much time to sort of get the characters right, get the stories right, you know, and you've got these, you know, these like scavengers, you know, called Little Sisters, and these big daddies are these sort of like massive tanks to protect them. So, and they just go about their own business if you don't attack them. And then if you do, like I say, you can either harvest the Little Sisters or you can save them. So there's like, you know, so there's narrative choices you can make which decide on what the ending is. But also, like he says, you know, you've got this lived-in world, and like I said, great stories and great games can do that. What I think movies and other you know, genres can't do. So I know I'm and it's the same thing like when you look at sort of things like composers and things like that. You know, there's some, you know, massively famous directors, musical composers who basically do like massive orchestral scores. When you're looking at games like the Final Fantasy series, you know, you've got you've got a lot of people who cut the teeth in video games, and like you said, and I love that, and I do think, you know, there is a lot more sort of, you know, you could do a lot more cross-pollination with some like movie directors if they wanted to go into sort of like movies and into video games and things like that. So yeah, so a few more examples, like I says, if you're talking about Final Fantasy with like, you know, things like decision making or, you know, surprises, twists and things like that, you know, things which cause reaction, which, you know, I think has more of an impact in a video game, because sometimes you can talk to people who like, you know, even like 20-30 years on, you know, you can say, do you remember your reaction when you first played this? And honestly, and people go, oh, you know, it's so ingrained. I mean, spoiler for like, I think a 20-year-old game, but Final Fantasy VII, when Aerith dies and gets killed by Sephiroth, it's like it came out of nowhere, and it was just like, and if that was like made today, and now that twist, I think the internet would just melt. It really would, because it's like, yeah, when everyone got to that bit, you're just like, and I think that was like close to like the end of the first disc, and you're like, yep, this is going to be one of those stories. And like I said, and I love games which, you know, keep changing things up and you know, keeping you on edge. I mean, some of my sort of like favourite games, there's also like games which are a bit more like walking simulators, which sort of, tell a certain story. And one of them, which I think goes into this category of being art, is What Remains of Edith Finch. And it's basically like little vignettes of like short stories about this misfortune / this sort of curse put upon this Finch family, and basically it all comes together in this narrative of somebody going, exploring this house and finding the stories and the misfortunes of all these people, which you get to control in one way or another in completely different formats as well, and it's just done so well. And like I said, it's a very sad, dark game, honestly, because it's basically about people dying, but it's but there is also like a hopeful but a massively engaging story, and it's definitely one of the ones which I was surprised, because I'm not a big fan of walking simulators. There've been one or two which have captured me and found very interesting, like Home. But What Remains of Edith Finch is basically one of my favourites. Talking to another one which I do have to do honourable mention is Myst. The point and click puzzler. Like I said, this was one of my ones which, like I said, it put in proper FMVs, video clips of real people acting and things like that, and it blended it with this world, and another one of mine was a very failed game, but it was very interesting, called Starship Titanic. That was also a great point and click, but with Myst, it sort of, it was this sort of really engrossing adventure where you're sort of trying to find it, and some of the puzzles were absolutely hard as nails, but like I said, with what it could do graphically at the time, it was very great, and it was such a interesting game to play. So one more point as well, that I think recently the Supreme Court in America has ruled that video games are art form, and they should be protected like any other work of art, like movies, like musicals, like plays and things like that, and books. So, because that's the only thing which does worry me about video games, is the preservation, because a lot of these developers and publishers don't care about their history, they just care about making the millions now. So at the moment, there's unless they do like a really slapdash remaster and charge like 30 quid for, usually these sort of games which were very pivotal in progressing video games are either not in the mainstream, or are so hard to track down and to play a version of, that it's not worth all the hassle. And hopefully, like I said, not just in America, around the world, these sort of companies can sort of protect these games in formats as they are. Because also another thing they've started to do is censor video games, because it's like they've been doing in movies, being airbrushing when people smoke and things like that. And it's of the time that was the the artists and the creators' ideas. It's like, if you don't like that, then don't watch these movies. Yes, there might be, warnings if something is, not socially accepted anymore. I do understand that. But when you're literally airbrushing things out, or like even in like movies, I think was it Splash or something, where they basically, there was too much of somebody's bottom, so they basically covered it in more hair, and it's like it's a bottom, it's like it's not really going to offend, and if it does, then shame on them. So that's the only issue at the moment. There is companies and there is individuals who are basically pursuing and putting things on like ROMs which are able to access, but then it becomes a licensing issue. But I think when these companies haven't even touched a video game property in like 30 years, I think there should be a sort of a system where they can sort of put it to freely available to people, or at least not have the fear of like any form of prosecution if anybody like wants to put it onto a different format, or put it on a ROM, or put it on a retro console emulator or something like that. So but that's for another story. But that's the only thing which worries about some of these really important games in the progression of video games, that sometimes these are like lost, because it's like one of my favourite games, Final Fantasy VIII. For many years there wasn't a remaster of it, and everyone was like, what is happening? And the truth was that when these games were like created, the original masters were just like either they weren't put in safekeeping or anything like that. They were just like on a disc or on a computer somewhere, and just left. So a lot of like discs got damaged or corrupted and things like that, and it wasn't for lack of trying, but literally they had no original masters of that video game. So it wasn't until they found one later on, much later, that they eventually did. And that was the sad truth of a lot of these video games which were made around the sort of 80s, 90s and things like that. Some have been lost to time, and so I think sort of trying to keep hold on to the history and the progression of video games is as important as pushing the genre and pushing the artistic creation of people's ideas. And that's the thing, I think for people who are like sort of elitist and thinks, oh yeah, if you don't play video games you're sad, or if you don't go to the theatre you're uneducated. Art is art. I mean, like I said, I've been to plays, I've I paint, I create things, I love movies. I'm a massive music fan. I go to so many gigs and shows every year, and I love video games. So it's like they're all art and they all can be enjoyed. So I will leave that there, and I hope you guys enjoyed this impromptu podcast. I've just wrote on random bits of paper. But yeah, so I'm hoping to do more. Like I said, I've got a fair few things on at the moment, but like I said, hopefully I can do more of a weekly show, and not like once a month at the moment. So yeah, so take care, look after your mental health, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.